Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my Gameweek 32 team selection. Unfortunately, as you guys know, I did get a red arrow, so we're back at it again. After Gameweek 31, we got 44 points. What I do think is when I look at my team every week, it actually looks pretty decent. I think in terms of the swings in the wildcard, it's been pretty brutal. I remember actually discussing wildcard strategy with Ben Krellin, and we were sort of discussing all these 4.5 picks. We ended up on Nico together. When I look at Cliver and JP in my team, his team value is a little bit lesser than mine. So that's why he went for a Rodgers Evan Nilsson path, which made a lot of sense, right? You got chances at a double in Gameweek 33, which Rodgers does have, and not even a chance, sorry, but of course a concrete possibility at the time. What I felt like was the case. And then in 36, he's also got his Bournemouth player for 36 with Evan Nilsson. Whereas in my case, I've got João Pedro, and I also have Clivert, who sort of fit the mold within the Bournemouth piece. And João Pedro's minutes has gone absolutely to the toilet after somehow not actually playing too much over the international break, but then actually, probably being shoved in a little bit too early within the FA Cup extra time piece. And it just hasn't really worked out at all. Evan Nilsson, I think I'm probably 17 points down versus. Admittedly, even if I went for Rodgers, I think I would have most likely played Sarr over the last two matches because I do respect the Nottingham Forest defense quite a lot. I probably would have benched Rodgers last week as well, just because Sarr had a better game. And so no regrets there. But I think the issue with Clifford is I'm still standing here in Gameweek 32 about to press the bench boost button, and it doesn't seem like we actually have any concrete news on his availability. And whilst I think it does look like, in hindsight, a bad decision, what I would say is that in terms of the decision making leading up to that point, we had a lot of Bournemouth journalists speak on that. We listened to all Irola's embargoed press conference comments and also his general press conference comments, and it actually seemed like the position at the time 2 weeks ago was that it was just fatigue, that there was no injury, that there was no muscle overload, which was the piece of information that we got last week, right? A week after deadline. And I think I've seen an Instagram story from Kirkus mentioning that, or showing that Cliver was in the gym, but that was sort of training lifts and weights. So I don't think we've seen him on grass, and that's a huge concern of mine. But I actually have now sort of thought about it, and my free hit strategy is actually probably going to depend entirely on whether I think Clivert's going to start this match here versus West Ham, or not even start the match necessarily, but at least his availability really for this match. So that's kind of where we're at, unfortunately, from an FPL perspective. As far as the rest of the team, I did really like going for Eze, for example, over Munoz. I think that's not gone too harshly. Clearly, the decision to not go Mateta looks bad because I've got João Pedro. But I also have to mention that I was equally close to getting Evan Nilsson. I wasn't really quite considering a Mateta draft, so I don't think I can say I was there. And with Munoz, I think I've had other defenders who've done well. Clearly, I don't have the better defenders like Livramento so far, who's done a lot better than Trippier. Trippier is playing a little bit more of a reserve type role, but we also know he's got access to set pieces, which is very nice. And also some of the right-handed side corners. So hopefully some of that can come in over the next 2 weeks, or next 3 weeks potentially. As far as someone like Pope, it was nice to get a clean sheet this week as well. Probably, softly, just a better decision than Henderson. Nico Williams actually been points farming on the bench, but I don't think I really regret the decisions there in terms of playing players like that. And Sarr just hasn't delivered anything whatsoever, whilst being another differential pick on the wildcard. So I think, as ever, when I look at teams like, let's say, Newcastle and Crystal Palace, I think you can pick 3 or out of 5 or even 6 players each week, and the outcomes can be very diverse. I think the only player that for me who was an absolute lock was most likely going to be Isak, right, from these two teams. And so far I'm still keeping up the hope that some of these Newcastle and Crystal Palace players can turn good, and they have an opportunity to do so exactly on bench boost 32. With Palmer, I'll just speak on him quickly. I mean, very shocked to see the kind of substitution, or rather the benching versus Brentford, and it seems like he's still sort of managing fitness, which is very strange because I think he played 90 minutes versus Tottenham, didn't get to play extra time in that game, suddenly was rested for a week really, and then benched, and then played 45 minutes versus Legia, but Maresca apparently had said that was a pre-planned substitution, including Tosin. So his fitness is probably not at the best spot, but you have to imagine that he should be starting versus Ipswich. It does feel a bit vague now, because I think there are players like, let's say, Enzo Fernandez, who are, essential to the team, Caicedo as well, but Palmer, maybe in the sort of, I guess, level of fitness that he has right now, isn't there. So we just have to hope that Palmer's going to do the goods for Ipswich at home and hopefully start there. With Saliba, I don't think there's too much of a risk of rotation. I spoke about that within my cheat sheet video. If you're interested in sort of watching my thoughts overall in terms of how to approach generally, Arsenal, Aston Villa, Man City type of strategy, feel free to watch that video. I give my thoughts in terms of all those key players and more specifically for the 3 hit 34 meta strategy. But I within my transfer plans spoke a lot about how I was interested in 3 hit 33. So I think for the purposes of this team selection, I don't have the benefit of listening to Andoni Iraola's press conference on Friday. This is being recorded Thursday night after the Europa League games, which were pretty awful to watch, but I did watch them. And we'll just have to sort of make a gut call, really, when it comes to Kluivert's fitness. Gabriel's going to go. When I look at my team, he's going to go. And once again, the defender that I'm going for is dependent on the strategy. And Nico Williams is just a strong pick in general with Everton at home. And one thing that I think that I like to make clear is actually I think the benefit of going 3 at 33 potentially is actually the ability to invest more into Brighton players that get to play versus Leicester at home. Now, Leicester at home probably is, I think, the altogether big treat of the season when it comes to getting clean sheets. They've probably given 8 or 9 straight to opponents. This might be the one where we get the arrow in the knee, but I really like the upside of potential players like Duncan Estupiñán. I kind of spoke about that on the cheat sheet as well. And that's the position that I'm in. I feel like I'm very much forced into a bench boost 32 because the goalkeeper pairing that I opted for. And I think the sad thing too is when I look at it, if I went for a bench boost 33 drafted, there could have been a world, and there probably would have been a world where I actually would have gone for Murphy. But no more complaints in terms of whining about points outcomes. This is what it is. I think the team is still strong as long as Kluivert's fit. And if he's not fit, we'll just have to react to that as we do in FPL. So that's how things stand when it comes to moving out of Gameweek 31. I have 2 free transfers now, and we can sort of operate with plans. Now, in terms of actually looking at this week, I think it's good to contextualize as ever with some market odds. I'd also like to mention that this is approaching a point in the season where, interestingly, the recent statistics when it comes to footballing matches has shown a general drop off in terms of attacking threat for a lot of Premier League teams. And so this kind of second half season effect, particularly when I think league positions, or rather lack of ability to sort of move into relevant league positions for teams and players, seemingly has had an impact. And we can kind of see that from an analytical point of view as well. I don't think that's going to have a huge impact in terms of how we pick players, because this season the bonus is still very much structured to players who score goals in the striker position. So it's a small shift, but I don't think necessarily that means we're going to approach with more defenders. But I guess, if anything, the better defensive teams previously probably just have a bigger advantage now. And so your valuation of defenders will only sort of move in line with where they previously were, but you now rank them a little bit probably better against maybe at times midfielders or forwards. So one thing I'd like to show is Rob T's graphics as ever. You can find him at RobTFPL on Twitter or x.com. This week, what I find is that we have a lot of good fixtures on offer. Chelsea with the probably biggest gulf in fixture when it comes to sort of attacking threat, but actually Leicester give you the best chance of getting a clean sheet. And it kind of just shows you how bad Leicester and Southampton truly are. That Aston Villa, for example, with an away match is so high up there in terms of projected goals. But there's also, I guess, a soft new manager impact. We'll see what that means for the Southampton team as they play the rest of the season as sort of being an unfortunately record-breaking team, I suppose, that has already secured relegation. Lots of good clean sheet odds on offer this week, and I'm just going to play them as they are because I have a bench boost. So one thing that I think is quite interesting is, yes, you can move into more Arsenal players because actually Arsenal versus Brentford is quite a good game. It is sandwiched within this Madrid match, and so I think there's a lot of scope for rotation. So players like Trossard and Nwaneri, Jorginho should all play, even Sterling, and that's going to have an impact on a lot of attackers. But I still think there's a world where players like Marino and Kuier can still continue to play and start matches. And I think they're interesting transfers for this week for a lot of people looking into these players. With City, it's a bit of a mirror matchup. A lot of us own City players, a lot of us own Crystal Palace players, so you're kind of playing them against each other, but Crystal Palace do have a double, so it doesn't feel so bad if you own Crystal Palace attackers. Same thing with, let's say, in my case, where I don't think I'm expecting Crystal Palace really to come away with clean sheets in either of their matches, but I do own a goalkeeper who can make saves, right? So that's a little bit of a buffer for this week, which I quite like. Hopefully the outcome in terms of how Henderson matches up to Munoz isn't so bad as last week. There's obviously chances where Henderson can outscore Munoz, and that's happened in the past. So looking forward to one of those kind of swings, maybe going back my way. When it comes to defense, I think that Leicester game, as I said, is just so intriguing. Interestingly, most of the odds when this high this season haven't actually culminated in clean sheets. I believe a lot of the over 50% games have only turned good for a team called Arsenal. No surprise, one of the best defenses, as we've been saying. and sort of analyzing over the last 2 seasons, and 3 really. But that's it. I think there's a good chance to, if I go for a 33 strategy, to go deeper into Brighton, right? And if not, Arsenal's there for the taking. Even Crystal Palace and Man City players are interesting for this week, right? Where I'm tripled up on Crystal Palace, so that's not really a point for me. But I think generally for most teams, there's an opportunity to reconsider who your third Crystal Palace player is. Whereas in my case, I think I might actually be picking a Man City defender potentially, because we're struggling to generally decide whether a player like Foden or a player like Savinho is actually having really good minutes. So on a 3 at 34 template, I think actually maybe going Merino in the midfield makes a lot of sense for me. And then going for someone like Ruben Diaz in defense, or alternatively, I go for someone like, let's say, Rodgers in the midfield, and then go for someone like Kiwior in defense, knowing that I'm going to go for Saka to culminate the triple Arsenal in Gaming 33. So those are kind of moving thoughts in my head, but I think Merino's also an interesting pick, even if I go for the 3 at 34 direction, because a lot of people are already doubled up on Arsenal defense. And so having Merino and Saka is going to be a big differential against, let's say, the combination of Raya plus Saliba. So that's something I like to point out. But that's pretty much it in terms of the odds. In terms of attacking threat, Liverpool is actually a team that I think no one's really looking at, but arguably if you are on a bit of a differential strategy, I mean, there's a chance to go for Liverpool, because actually the short-term fixtures over the next 3 are quite good, particularly if you don't have a free hit at all. So something to mention at this point in time. But otherwise, let's just jump into my team selection. So the first team selection I'm going to do is what will happen if Kluivert is most likely going to be ready and available to play. So I will actually lock into a free at 33 chip strategy and go for more Brighton players, as I mentioned. I will be going for Henderson and Pope in this situation as my bench boost goalkeepers. I will be playing, instead of Gabriel, I will be going for Estupiñán as a transfer. I'll go Estupiñán, Saliba, Guardiola, Trippier, and Nico Williams. That gives me a lot of home games across the board. In fact, it's actually going to be a full house of home games for my defense, with the exception of Henderson, who plays away twice. And then in the midfield, with Kluivert fit, hopefully, he'll start Palmer, Eze, Salah, and Sarr. And then in the forward line, we're actually going João Pedro, Isak, and Marmoush. And here, of course, there's an opportunity to maybe even go triple Brighton with my second free transfer. But I kind of like the flexibility in this case of actually just keeping Saliba, because Arsenal are still a very elite team. And I still think it's going to be quite hard for Brentford to score versus Arsenal. Even on the reverse fixture, I remember actually it was probably a Raya mistake, all things being said, or rather a bit of ingenuity from Mbeumo to actually score within that match. So I feel quite comfortable actually not transferring out Saliba this week for someone like Lewis Dunk, even though Dunk probably carries a lot of upside this week because he's playing, fortunately, Leicester at home. As I mentioned, though, previously in my transfer plans, I like the idea of maybe saving a transfer just in case if we have more injuries popping up. It gives me a little bit more of a security blanket anyways for Game Week 34. As far as, let's say, what would happen if I think Kluivert's out and maybe Irola confirms that he won't be able to play the match, or once again, maybe the assessment of whether his availability is good for Game Week 32 is really, really poor, and I still think, why risk it? Why ruin the bench boost, I suppose? And maybe I still have a chance, as I said, to go with a bit more of a differential strategy. Then the plan for me is to actually go for 2 transfers. I will be going for Merino in the midfield, and that will be sort of selling Kluivert in this case. And I will also be selling Gabriel for Ruben Diaz. And part of the reason why I feel confident doing this is I do think that Merino's minutes towards the end of the season will be really good. We've seen that in some matches where they mass rotate that he plays in midfield, and we've seen in, generally speaking, good matches that he plays in the forward position. When I look at Game Week 33 for Arsenal, which I think anytime you move into an Arsenal player in Game Week 32 here, you know that there's probably a pretty significant risk that Arsenal can rotate, and that's fine. But you also know that actually when you look towards, let's say, Game Week 33, I think Arsenal won't rotate that much over those 2 games. Maybe the match versus Madrid is going to be quite extensive, quite exhaustive, and maybe you'll see rotation for Ipswich. But I actually think that the second match in Game Week 33 is basically going to be a dry run for that semi-final first leg. Now, I'm a Real Madrid fan. I have some hope that maybe we can turn that tie around, but I know that my chance is probably 4 to 5%, right? It's unrealistic. So is Arsenal most likely to be in the semi-finals of the Champions League? Absolutely. So I think it's very likely when you look at, let's say, there being six days of I think, difference between, let's say, the second match in Game Week 33, which I think is on the 23rd of April, I believe, and then the Champions League match, which basically happens 6 days after, on the 29th. So I really think that that's Merino playing up top no matter what. It's clearly the worst game, and so if I think about it in terms of upside chasing, yes, of course, sure, it'd be nice to have Trossard or Noneri or Sterling starting against, not Sterling really, but it would be nice to have these players playing versus Ipswich and starting. But at the end of the day, you're trying to make a decision for going for an Arsenal player who's going to have a little bit more long-term value to see out the season. I think Marino's minutes being so good just mean that he's going to be the pick that I actually prefer in the midfield to pair alongside Saka and Gameweek33. So in this case, I'd be going with Marino. So if I was to make transfers this week, as I said, I'd be going Henderson and Pope. I'd be going for Ruben Dias, Saliba, Guardiola, Trippier, and Nico Williams, paired alongside Marino, Palmer, Eze, Salah, Sarr, and then the forward line would be João Pedro, Isak, and Marmoush. Now, captaincy this week, I don't think is going to be something that warrants an extremely long segment. I'll be completely honest, my captaincy is going to be on Isak. I just think 2 home games, I'm not going to pass up on that opportunity. I don't really see myself necessarily going on a Crystal Palace attacker. Sure, Mateta actually has been absolutely amazing. Sure, Eze has been quite good recently too. But 2 away matches don't really match up for me, and arguably they're just worse fixtures compared to Newcastle. So this is Isak bound. I think, yes, of course, his fitness is a small question mark, but he's gotten a fair bit of rest over the course of this week. You know, teams have been involved in Europe. Isak fortunately hasn't. A team like United has. Crystal Palace will also be playing a lot of games too. So I think it's a good chance that you and Isak can just captain him. There will be other opportunities later this season to captain other people, right? People are going to slowly move off of Salah potentially, I suppose, given his declining quote unquote form. And when it comes to, let's say, some of the other picks, I think when you look week to week, with so many singles left, with very different qualities of fixtures, let's say when Liverpool face off versus Arsenal later this season, you've got an opportunity where most people will avoid the Salah captaincy there. In terms of gaming 33 and 34, I think there's interesting options, right? It's most likely going to be Saka on 33, but then on 34, that's most likely Salah as well. But then on 35, it's a week where it's once again up to the players. I think Mbumo actually becomes really interesting for me on gaming 35. On a game week like 36, a lot of us are probably going to just be on the City striker. I think if there's a double there, if there's no double, that opens up to be another opportunity for captaincy. And then 37, 38, I think it's totally up for debate. 38 is clearly a great Salah game, but 37, I think, is another opportunity to go against Salah. And potentially, once again, is one of those options, right? Because he's got an Ipswich match. So, yeah, I think there's going to be a couple coin flips left for the rest of the season for captaincy. I don't see this week as really being one that's worth the sort of risk to reward ratio. And I think this time you're also knowing that when you look at odds, when you look at, let's say, projected points, it's not remotely close to make that sort of gamble this week. So those are my thoughts in terms of Gameweek 32. I'm really hoping we get some news. I think that there's a world where I have to probably make that transfer in Kluivert, but I really hope I don't do that, because I do actually like the idea of maybe free hitting on 33 and just getting as much information as possible to kind of maximize on a bench boost, or rather a free hit. And ironically, last season I went for the kind of, you know, more passive blank Gameweek 29 free hit approach. It didn't go so well. I don't think that actually has influenced how I'm thinking about free hit 33 this time round, but I'd like to probably dip my hand in the basket of being able to pick, you know, my choice of the doublers really for 33, particularly if a lot of things change and if there's a lot of moving parts. And we know that the second leg of these Premier League, or rather Champions League matches, will have an influence. And same thing with really any potential injuries, things like that too. Another point, I suppose, is when I look at a team like City or a team like Aston Villa, it doesn't feel so bad not owning City and Aston Villa players week to week. So it's only the team in Arsenal that I think I'm quite worried about. And actually, Arsenal do, as I mentioned, have some pretty tough fixtures that can sway you off the idea that you need to 3 at 34, as long as you have enough players that can actually accommodate 34. And in my case, if Kluivert's fit and he serves me for the bench boost, he also serves me for Gaming 34. So I think I'm in a very unique position. I'm probably going to go with this sort of chip strategy gamble. All things go to plan, but otherwise, I hope you guys have a wonderful week ahead, and I'll see you guys soon.